Good day, everyone. I am Alexa Bisitero, your reporter number 1 for this topic 2, ethical issues in counseling practice. So for our topic outline, first is what is meant by ethical issues in counseling, the levels of ethics, putting clients' needs before your own, 5 things that we need to be aware of, the ethical decision making, the purposes of professional codes of ethics, and the 8 steps in making ethical decisions. So for our intended learning outcomes, by the end of the learning experience, students must be able to articulate and critique key concepts of ethical issues in counseling practice, identify the dimensions of confidentiality, and demonstrate ethical counseling practices. Chapter 8 introduces some of the ethical principles and issues that will be a basic part of your professional practice. Its purpose is to stimulate you to think about the ethical practice so that you can form a basis for making ethical decisions. Becoming an ethical counselor or therapist is a self-reflective process that requires a great deal of personal awareness, insight, and increasing clarity of what your values, priorities, and motivations are. Practicing ethically requires more than knowledge of the facts and rules, but a strong sense of who you are and how you uniquely will approaching counseling. So ethics, it examines the rational justification of our moral judgments and studies what is morally right or wrong, just or unjust. So what is meant by ethical issues in counseling? Ethics in counseling is a system of rules and principles that helps us decide what's okay and not okay in professional counseling. Ethics in counseling are suggested standards of conduct based on professional values and moral decision-making. Ethics in counseling are concerned with doing what is best for the client. Ethics are important to protect both the client and the counselor. Ethical issues in mental health professions are regulated by both laws and professional codes. The Committee on Professional Practice and Standards on 2003 of the American Psychological Association differentiates between ethics and law as follows. Ethics pertains to the standards that govern the conduct of its professional members. On the other hand, law is the body of rules that govern the affairs of people within a community, state, or a country. So reasons for ethical codes. Ethical standards exist for many reasons. They are designed to provide some guidelines for the professional behavior of the members. One of the primary reasons is that without a code of established ethics, a group of people with similar interests cannot be considered a professional organization. Van Hoosen-Cutler 1995 offered 3 reasons for the existence of ethical codes. First is ethical standards protect the profession from the government. They allow the profession to regulate itself and function autonomously. Second, ethical standards help control internal disagreement and bickering, thus promoting stability within the profession. And third is the ethical standards protect practitioners from the public, especially in malpractice cases, and if professionals behave according to ethics, the behavior is judged to be in compliance with the standards. This provide clients with some protection from incompetent counselors. Certain other reasons are ensuring competent professional behavior, responsibility to public trust, ethics and counseling. Professionals monitor their own and other members' professional behavior. Controversies over the development of ethical codes, the ethical dilemmas, character and virtue, ACA ethics code, aspirations and guidelines, and the standards. So, Kitchener 1984 has identified 5 moral principles which often help to clarify the issues involved in a given situation. First is being trustworthy or the fidelity, the autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. So being trustworthy or fidelity, it involves the notions of loyalty, faithfulness, and honoring commitments. Being trustworthy is regarded as fundamental to understanding and resolving ethical issues. So yung pagiging totoo natin, pagiging faithful natin sa mga kliyente natin ay napaka-importanting bagay sa pagresolba at pag-intindi sa kanilang mga problema. Is the autonomy. The essence of this principle is allowing an individual the freedom of choice and action. ini-emphasize ng principle na ito yung importansya sa pag-develop ng ability ng isang kliyente to be self-directing within the therapy at sa lahat ng aspeto ng kanyang buhay. Third is beneficence. The principle of beneficence means acting the best interest of the client based on professional assessment. Beneficence reflects the counselor's responsibility to contribute to the welfare ng kliyente. So fourth is the non-maleficence. Non-maleficence is the concept of not causing harm to others, often explained as, above all, do no harm. This principle is considered by some to be the most critical of all principles, even though theoretically they are all of equal weight. This principle reflects both the idea of not inflicting intentional harm and not engaging in actions that risk harming others. Fifth is the justice. The principle of justice requires being just and fair, pantay sa lahat ng mga kliyente, and ang pagkakaroon ng respeto sa kanilang karapatan at dignidad. Justice does not mean treating all individuals the same. It points out that the formal meaning of justice is treating equals equally and unequals equally but in proportion to the relevant differences. It directs attention to considering conscientiously any legal requirement and obligations and remaining alert to potential conflicts between legal and ethical obligations. When exploring an ethical dilemma, the counselor needs to examine the situation of how each of the above principles or mentioned principles may apply to that particular case. At times, this examination alone will clarify the issue so that the means for resolving the dilemma becomes clear. When an initial review of the 5 foundation principles does not provide the direction, it is helpful to be able to work through the steps of an ethical decision-making model, which will be discussed later on. Here we have the levels of ethical practice. First is the mandatory ethics, the aspirational ethics, and the positive ethics. So mandatory ethics, it is a view of ethical practice that deals with the minimum level of professional practice. In this level of ethics, it talks about following the rules that being established by the counselor and then yung mga organization and governing bodies nito. Second is the aspirational ethics. It is a higher level of ethical practice that addresses doing what is in the best interests of the clients. So dito naman sa aspirational ethics, it's all about naman the spirit of law kung saan yung counselor has internalized basic moral principles and can consider best practices with more depth and nuance. In positive ethics, it is an approach taken by practitioners who want to do their best for clients rather than simply meet the minimum standards to stay out of the trouble. Putting clients' needs before your own. So as counselors, we cannot always keep our personal needs completely separate from our relationship with clients. Ethically, it is essential that we become aware sa ating mga needs and even areas of unfinished business, potential personal problems, and our sources of counter-transference. We need to realize how such factors could interfere with effectively and ethically serving our clients. So whose needs are being met in this relationship? My clients or my own? It takes considerable professional maturity to make an honest appraisal of how your behavior affects your clients. It is not unethical for us to meet our personal needs through our professional work, but importante that these needs should be kept in perspective. So counseling relationship exists for the benefits ng mga kliyente at hindi sa mga counselor. The objective to help the client to feel relieved at makahanap ng solusyon sa kanilang mga problema. It is important that to avoid exploiting the client to meet your own needs. So an ethical problem exists when we meet our needs in either obvious or subtle ways at the expense of our clients' needs. And it is crucial that we avoid exploiting or harming our clients. So what do we need to be aware of? Ano yung mga bagay na kailangan natin gawin para maging aware tayo? Lahat naman tayo ay may mga certain blind spots tayo at distortions sa realidad. We have responsibilities to work actively toward expanding our own self-awareness and para ma-learn to recognize the areas of prejudice and vulnerability. If aware tayo sa sarili natin kung ano yung mga personal na problema natin and willing tayo i-work through it, mayroong less chance that we will project it sa ating mga kliyente. If certain problems areas surface and old conflicts become reactivated, we have an ethical obligation to seek personal therapy to avoid harming our clients. We must also examine other or less obviously harmful personal needs that can get in the way of creating growth-producing relationship, such as the need for control and power. Second is the need to be nurturing and helpful. Third is the need to change others in the direction of our own values. Fourth is the need for feeling adequate. Fifth is the need to be respected and appreciated. Although these needs are not necessarily unhealthy, importante din na these needs should be met outside of our work as therapists or soon as therapists if we are to be involved with helping others find satisfaction in their lives. So, ethical decision making. As a practitioner, you will ultimately have to apply the ethics codes of your profession to the many practical problems you face. You will not be able to rely on ready-made answers given by professional organizations, which typically provide only broad guidelines for responsible practice. So, part of practice of making ethical decisions involves learning about the resources from which you can draw when you are dealing with an ethical question. Professional codes of ethics is a set of standards of conduct based upon an agreed-on set of values by which professionals in a given occupation, such as counseling or psychology. The ACA, or the American Counseling Association, is a non-profit professional and educational organization dedicated to the growth and enhancement of the counseling profession, and it was founded in 1952. ACA is the world's largest association representing professional counselors in various practice settings. ACA also is instrumental in setting professional and ethical standards for the counseling profession. The association has also made considerable strides in accreditation, licensure, and national certification. In ACA, or American Counseling Association, ethical standards are arranged under topical section headings. There are 5 main purposes and 8 major sections of the standards. So, here is the ACA codes of ethics served in 5 main purposes. First is the code enables the association to clarify to current and future members and to those served by members the nature of the ethical responsibilities held in common by its members. Second, the code helps support the mission of the association. So, sinusuportahan ng code yung mission ng mga asosasyon. And third, the code establishes principles that define ethical behavior and best practices sa mga members ng association. Fourth, the code serves as an ethical guide designed to assist members in constructing a professional course of action that best serves those utilizing counseling services and best promotes the values of the counseling profession. Fifth is the code serves as a basis or basihan for processing of ethical complaints and inquiries initiated against members ng association. Many practitioners know ang takot about becoming involved in a lawsuit that they gear their practices mainly toward fulfilling legal minimums rather than thinking kung ano ba yung nararapat para sa kanilang mga kliyente. If we get caught up in our fears of being sued, chances are that hindi tayo magiging creative or effective sa ating mga trabaho. In this era of litigation, it makes sense to be aware of the legal aspects of practice and to do what is possible to reduce the chance of malpractice action. But it is a mistake to confuse behaving legally with being ethical. Although following the law is part of ethical behavior, being an ethical practitioner involves far more. One of the best ways to prevent being sued for malpractice rests in demonstrating respect for clients, having welfare as a central concern, and practicing within the framework of professional codes. So ano yung mga best way na ma-prevent sa for being sued for malpractice rest? Kailangan ng magpapakita ng respect sa ating mga clients, having their welfare as a central concern, and practicing within the framework of professional codes. Yun yung importante, yun sila. So over time, most of the ethics codes of various mental health professions have evolved into lengthy documents setting forth what is desired behavior and prescribing behavior that may not serve the client's welfare. So even though codes are becoming more specific, they do not convey ultimate truth, nor do they provide ready-made answers for the ethical dilemmas that practitioners will encounter. And then ultimately, professionals are expected to exercise prudent judgment when it comes to interpreting and applying ethical principles to specific situations. Here we have the 8 steps in making ethical decisions. First is identify the problem. Second is apply the ACA codes of ethics and determine the nature and dimensions of the dilemma. Fourth is generate potential courses of action. Fifth is consider the potential consequences of all options. Choose a course of action. Sixth is evaluate the selected course of action. And seventh is implement the course of action. So first is identify the problem. Gather as much information as you can that will illuminate the situation. While gathering much information, it is important na maging specific ka and objective as possible. In writing ideas, you can write it on a paper because it often helps provide clarity. You can outline the facts, separate mo yung mga innuendos, assumptions, or even hypotheses at mga suspicions. Meron ding mga several questions na pwede mong itanong sa sarili mo like, is it an ethical, legal, professional, or clinical problem? Or is it a combination of more than one of these? If a legal question exists, be sure to seek a legal advice. So second is apply the ACA Code of Ethics. After having clarified the problem, refer to the American Counseling Association Codes of Ethics to see if the issue is addressed. Also consider any other state or professional codes that may apply to you. When reviewing the ethical codes, be sure to consider any multicultural perspective or the particular case. Remember to examine all the nuances that exist when technology is involved. If there is an applicable standard or several standards and they are specific and clear, following the course of action indicated should lead to a resolution of the problem. If the problem is not resolved by reviewing the ACA Code of Ethics, then you can have a complex ethical dilemma and need to proceed with further steps in ethical decision-making. So third, is determine the nature and dilemmas and the dimensions of the dilemma. There are a few steps to follow to ensure that you have examined the problem in all of its various dimensions. Examine the dilemma's implication for each of the foundational principles like the autonomy, justice, beneficence, non-maleficence, and fidelity. It's also important to decide which of the principles apply to the specific situation at para ma-determine kung anong principles na kailangan i-prioritize for you sa ganitong case. Also, in determining the nature and dimensions of the dilemma, another step is review the relevant professional literature to ensure na ginagamit mo yung tama at current professional thinking and aware ka sa mga diversity issues na involved sa particular na sitwasyon. Another step is consult with experienced professional counselors and or supervisors who also abide by the American Counseling Association Code of Ethics. The last step is consult your state or national professional associations to see if makaprovide ba sila ng tulong sa nasabing dilemma. So fourth is generate potential course of action. Brainstorm as many potential courses of action as possible. Maging creative ka and ilista mo lahat ng mga options na naiisip mo even ones that naiisip mo or hindi ka sure. While in this brainstorming phase, you want to generate as many potential solutions as possible. Do not worry about judging and eliminating your solutions, for you will evaluate them in the next step. So whenever possible daw, consult with at least one colleague who subscribers to the American Counseling Association Codes of Ethics para matulungan ka mag-generate ng mga options mo. Fifth in this decision making is consider the potential consequences of all options and determine a course of action. Considering the information you have gathered and the priorities you have set, evaluate each option and being sure to assess the potential consequences for all of the parties involved. Eliminate the options that clearly do not give the desired results or magkakos ng mas matindi or mas malaki pang problema or consequences. It also need to review the remaining options para ma-determine kung ano yung mga options na kailangan or need i-combine sa mga best solutions or options sa sitwasyon na yun and addresses the priorities na kailangan mong i-identify. I hope you are following na. So here na tayo sa 6 decision making and evaluate the selected course of action. Need to review the selected course of action to see if it presents any new ethical considerations. Apply the 3 simple tests to the selected course of action to ensure na tama ito. The 3 selected course of actions in this decision making is the justice, publicity, and universality. In justice, in applying the test of justice, you need to assess your own sense of fairness by determining whether if i-treat mo ba yung mga tao same sa pagtato mo sa iba at same din sa situation na yun. So for the publicity, for the test of publicity, you ask yourself whether you want your behavior reported in the press. So for the universality, the test of universality asks you to assess whether you could recommend the same course of action to another counselor na same din sa sitwasyon na yun. So in the course of action you have selected or causes any new ethical issues, then you'll need to go back to the beginning and i-re-evaluate mo yung mga steps ng process na ito. If you can answer in the affirmative to each of the questions suggested by thus passing the tests of justice, publicity, and universality, and then you are satisfied that you have selected an appropriate course of action. 7th, ethical decision making is implement the course of action. Strengthen your resolve to allow you to carry out your plan. Just because it is the right decision does not mean it will be easy to implement. So hindi porket tama yung decision mo, ibig sabihin is basta-basta lang yun or madali lang yun i-implement. Taking the appropriate action in an ethical dilemma is often difficult. So after implementing your course of action, it is good to practice to follow up on the situation para ma-assess whether your actions had the anticipated effects and yung mga consequences. So let's review the 7 ethical decision making Um, First is identify the problem. Second is apply the ACA Code of Ethics. Third is determine the nature and dimensions of the dilemma. Fourth is general potential courses of action. Fifth is consider the potential consequences of all options and determine a course of action. Sixth is evaluate the selected course of action. And lastly is implement the course of action. So it is important no that we need to realize that the different professionals may choose different courses of action for the same situation. There is rarely one right answer to a complex ethical dilemma, however. If you follow a systematic model, you can be assured that you will be able to give a professional explanation for the course of action na pipiliin mo. So that's it for the first part of the report. These are my references and thank you.